So thanks for having me here today. Just a fun little story for you guys. I work at Airbnb, so when we travel, it probably makes sense we stay at Airbnb. I've enjoyed my last couple of days by the beach on Harya-Klan, if I pronounce it properly. It's been great. I got off the airplane on Saturday, checked into my listing, went right to the beach, went swimming. So thanks. I think that's a good Tel Aviv experience. So a couple questions for you guys. How many of you have stayed on Airbnb? That's great. Pretty much everybody. How many of you host on Airbnb? Look at that. That's pretty good. What's the rest of you guys doing? Cool. So the title of my presentation hopefully evokes some kind of emotion from you, even if it's negative. And you're saying, hey, you're the director of online marketing. What are you talking about this love thing? How do you measure that? What's going on with this? And so what I'd like to do today is really share why that's an important part of our story and why we think about it. To do that, we really need to start from the beginning. So through this presentation, I'm going to share a couple of things with you. I'm going to start with the founding story. How many people here know our founding story? A couple of you. I'll keep it brief. It'll be just on the core points. I'm going to talk about how we think about values. We're a very mission-driven company. So I'm going to talk about what we think about our mission, how we achieve it. And then I'm going to talk about our growth team and what the values are and how we measure and how we do things in the growth team, what our approach is, and kind of the rules of engagement. I'll go right into our online marketing in terms of how we think about it strategically. And I'll walk through some practical examples. So I'll walk through our latest campaign. And I'll finish off with a couple data points. So we'll kind of start from a very top philosophical sense and go all the way down to hard facts. So kicking off, at Airbnb, our first and most important core value is be a host. It probably makes sense, right? We're a hospitality company. And so I think that the best way I can be a host for all of you today is if I tell you about me, so we kind of connect personally. So the first thing is my last name. It's pretty hard to pronounce. There's a lot of Eastern Europeans here in Israel, so I find usually people do a good job with it. But the easy phonetic way to think about it is this. So first is the music, jazz, right? Second is the Eastern philosophy, right? Zen. And then finally the winter sports skiing, Jeszenszky. That's how we say it in North America anyways. The other thing we love at Airbnb is fun facts, good icebreakers. So I've got 4 fun facts for you today. First is I'm not American. I live in San Francisco. I work for Airbnb, but I'm Canadian. But no, I don't have a flag on my backpack. There's no Canadian flags on my stuff. I know most Canadians like to do that. The second thing is that I've lived in 4 different countries, and I've traveled to over 40. This is my 3rd trip to Tel Aviv. So it's been a lot of fun every time. I used to play house music for about 10 years in addition to doing my professional job. I traveled all over the world, and I had my own record label. And then finally, my Israeli friends have taught me my favorite Hebrew word, which is sababa. You can do anything with that. It could be a question, it could be an answer, right? I say it to the taxi driver on the way in. He thinks I speak Hebrew. He has a whole conversation with me. No idea what's going on. But it still works anyways. Cool. So let's talk about the founding story. So this here is the very first listing, the very first apartment on Airbnb. And it's on Roush Street in San Francisco in an area called Soma. So for those of you who've been in San Francisco, you know Soma is the area where most of the tech companies are. And there was 3 air mattresses put into this apartment because the founders couldn't make the rent money. It's a real story. It's not there for PR. But not only that, this is our first office. So at one point in time, the 3 co-founders lived here, right? They moved all the furniture out. It was full of desks. And when that was filled up, they got another apartment next door, and they filled it with desks. And when that one was filled up, they got a 3rd apartment. After the 3rd apartment, they couldn't find any more room in the building, so they actually had to get a real office. So we are really a home-based business. It started all from there. The next interesting thing is this. Probably most of you haven't seen this. Original logo. And here's the first website. It even had Google ads on the bottom. So the founders were so hungry to make some money, they did everything possible. So the story is that 2 of the founders were living in the apartment at the time, and they needed to make rent. And they wanted to go to this design conference. They were designers. 2 of our co-founders are industrial designers. And they decided they would go hit up designers coming to town, because San Francisco gets booked up when there's events. It's hard to find hotels, and see if they could get people to stay with them. And what happened was, they got these 3 people here. They were willing to come and stay with a stranger in an air mattress and hang out and eat cereal with them, right? What you'll notice with these guys here is that they're not young people. They're not couch surfers, right? They're professionals. They all work in the design industry. Right? They decided to do this for an adventure, to do something different. And that stays true today. Our core base of users are tech workers and creative folks, right? Early adopters. So it's interesting, you can see. So these 3 guys here, these are our co-founders. Joe and Brian on the outside, those are the designer co-founders. The guy in the middle, Nate, he's the technical co-founder, right? So these guys met at Rhode Island School of Design, one of the top design schools in the US, fast friends. Nate in the middle, he lived briefly in that apartment with Joe, and then he moved out and Brian moved in. But Nate, I feel like the Israeli population would really, and especially all you tech workers, would really love Nate. Nate had his first business at 14. He paid his way through Harvard from his own money, from his businesses, right? So he was already a successful entrepreneur before he went to university. So a pretty interesting trio. So when we had those first 3 people stay with us, these guys were like, holy crap, we figured it out. It's a whole new business, we're gonna disrupt the world. The reality was, it took a long time to build this business, a very long time. It took a couple of years to even get a decent amount of traction. It was also 2008. So for those of you who remember 2008, financial crisis, right? They had a hard time getting funding. No one wanted to invest in it. In fact, most people said the idea was insane. Why would a stranger stay with a stranger? And why would someone want strangers staying in their home, right? Home is a very personal place. So what they did is they got a lot of credit cards, right? In the US, we like credit cards. And they funded it through credit cards. They had a binder full of credit cards, and they'd move money around to pay them off. Eventually, they had so much debt, they thought they were going to go bankrupt. And that's when Joe and Brian used their design skills. And we got this. How many of you know the story about these cereal boxes? A couple of you. So what happened was, 2008 was also the year of Obama, right? The big election in the US. It's a pivotal moment. And one of the things that happens is that when there's events in town, so in this case, Republican National Convention, Democratic National Convention, when they're electing who their candidate will be, that all the hotels fill up. So they went to these cities and they got more places to become hosts. And Joe and Brian printed sheets of paper. They cut them out by hand and hot glued the boxes together. They went to grocery stores and bought bulk cereal and put them in. They sold them for $40 a box. They raised $30,000, right? And paid off their credit card debt. And in 2008, we sold more cereal than we sold accommodations. So we were actually a cereal company. We weren't actually an accommodations company. But really pivotal, important point in the company's history. Also, a quick side note. I told you be a host is one of our core values. Our second most important core value is serial entrepreneur, spelled like cereal box, so it's a pun, right? It's that idea of being scrappy and finding ways to get things done. So I'm assuming most of you guys know what a tech incubator is, but really quickly, these are companies that bring startups in and help them figure out growth, help them figure out product market fit, and introduce them to investors. So Y Combinator, aka YC, is probably the top one. They applied for YC. And when they first, hey guys, when they first applied, they talked to Paul Graham, one of the founders. What happened was, he said it was a stupid idea. He said they were crazy, no one will do this, I'm not investing in this, you guys aren't getting in. On their way out the door, very defeated, Joe gave him a box of Obama O's, the cereal. And he looked at it and he said, what is this? And they told him how they raise money. And he said, whoa. He said, you guys are cockroaches, right? Can you imagine that? You've been through all of this, you've been told you're a cockroach. He said, you're a cockroach, we are entering a financial nuclear winter, and only cockroaches will survive. It's like, so you guys are in. And so from that point on, things started going right for them. They had all had to take side jobs up until this point just to make rent, just to live. And from this point on, they said, we're not going to do anything else. We're going to focus for the 90 days of YC, and we're going to become ramen profitable. How many of you guys are familiar with that? So ramen profitability is something we like to say in Silicon Valley, which is you make enough money to run your business, and you can eat ramen 3 meals a day, because it's the cheapest possible food that can keep you alive, right? So that's what they were aiming for. That was their benchmark. And when they got out of YC, they got investment from some top-tier VCs, and the rest is history. That's when the inflection point happened. That's when the company became really successful. So a couple key things happened at YC, and so these inform us today, and so that's why I'm telling you this story. The first is focusing on the user. We're relentless about this. We're always obsessed with design and user experience. So Paul Bouquet, who's featured here, he said it's initially better to focus on a few users than a lot, right? You want a few users that really love you. And this should make sense, because if you have a few users that love you, you're going to get a lot of word of mouth. They're going to tell people, they're going to be loyal customers, they're going to give you feedback, they care, right? Having a lot of users who don't care, they just bounce, they're gone, they're in and out. And so as a company, we're always focusing on that. We're always focusing on how can we get that love, how can we keep that user experience strong. The second thing is this is Paul Graham, the guy who called the founders cockroaches. He said, do things that don't scale. He's got a great blog. I've got it there. So the way that we scaled originally was this. Joe and Brian would fly out to New York, which was our first market that really started to take off. They'd go door to door and recruit hosts, and they'd go talk to existing hosts. Right? They'd get feedback from the product. They'd email Nate, and Nate would stay up all night fixing it. The next day, they'd go talk to the host, and they're like, does this fix? Does this work? Are you happy? And they grew it that way. Right? It's not scalable, but it was really important for product market fit. And even Joe and Brian realized that the photos were a huge issue. Having great photos increased conversion rate, increased the user experience. But they couldn't afford a proper camera. So every week in New York, they would rent photography equipment and go and take photos for hosts for free. Nowadays, we offer that as a service. Any host that we have can ask for free professional photos, and we have a network of over 10,000 photographers that we pay to do that. So when you do things that don't scale to begin with, you can find ways to scale it. But it's more about getting over that hump, right? If you get that base of users who love you, and then you move forward with that, you've got a really strong place to work from. If you have people who aren't committed, it's hard to keep building. And so from 2009 to today, you can see this heat map. You can see how our growth has gone. Well, 2014. All right. Now we have actually 2.3 million homes on Airbnb, so more than 2 million. We're in 35,000 cities. We're in 191 countries. The only 3 countries we're not in are Syria, North Korea, and Iran, and we're hoping that with the US sanctions lifting that we might get into Iran. So almost everywhere. Syria and North Korea are probably arguable, but we want to have the whole world belonging. Our mission is to create a world of belonging. So they may eventually show up. And we've had over 100 million guests stay on Airbnb. When I spoke to an audience about a year and a half ago, it was only 35 million. So you can see how fast it's growing. It's pretty amazing. So with that in mind, let's talk about the core values. So we'll start here. We've kind of got high level on sort of the founding story, what drives us. We'll talk quickly about the values. Then I'll get into our growth team and then my team. So core values, we've talked about this. But really quickly, why they're so important to us is this. Brian, our CEO, co-founder, he spoke to Peter Thiel, famous VC, one of the PayPal founders, early investor in Facebook. And he told Brian, don't F up the culture. Right? And Brian takes it really seriously. All the founders are talking to us a lot about culture. We kind of obsess about it. The first thing is this idea of being a host. I shared that with you. It makes sense. The second thing is serial entrepreneur. We talked about that. The next one, embrace the adventure. I think it makes sense, right? If you're going to take Airbnbs, you're going to cross through that sort of stranger danger, you're going to embrace the adventure. And so we want to bring that out to the world. Simplify is a real design thing, right? For product and design people, you get this. The hardest thing to do is to create a simple product, right? Just put the absolute number of features you need in it and make it really easy to use. Same with design. If you're doing anything creative. Simple design is the hardest design. Champion the mission, and every frame matters are the last two. Champion the mission, I think, makes sense. We're a very mission-driven company. We're very values-driven. And the final one, every frame matters, really comes back to design again. It's like in a movie reel or photography, making sure that the details are there, making sure you think through and get them right. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk quickly about growth at Airbnb, so our growth team, our mission, our models, and our principles, and so what drives us, and how did those relate to those values I talked about in that founding story, right? Because you can talk about those things, and you can say, hey, Paul, how does that relate to my work, right? I've got a lot of shit to do. It's tough. And so this is how we think about it. So first, this one should be obvious, right? I won't read it out. But this one here is a big one. This relates back to my opening slide. This idea of love creating growth, not the other way around. So let's think about that for a minute. It might sound fluffy at first, but it's actually really true. As founders, as tech people, as marketers, as growth hackers, whatever term you want to use, you can do a lot of tactics to get people into your product, right? You can drive growth in a lot of different ways. Some of them a little bit dishonest, right? But you'll never see users give you that love and that word of mouth and have high retention if you do a lot of tactics that break trust, right? And as Airbnb, we're a trust-based platform. We can't do anything to break trust. It'll kill us, right? But if you get a lot of user love, you get a lot of passion, and people really enjoy using your product, you're going to talk about it. And our biggest growth driver today is word of mouth, by far, right? And that's because we do a lot to create that experience. So with that in mind, there's 4 things we focus on the growth team at Airbnb. The first one is this: empathy-driven, evidence-fueled. It sounds nice, but what does it mean? What it really means is this. It means that we use data for everything. We're very religious about our data, but at the end of the day, we make our decisions based on what we think is right for our core values, thinking about the human experience, thinking about human beings. So it's kind of a gut thing, right? And we're always pulling in qualitative data as well as quantitative data. So we're talking to users. Could be on the phone, could be in person. We run a lot of surveys on our site. We use Google consumer surveys. We do all sorts of things to get that qualitative and the quantitative. Right? Data can take you to a point that doesn't measure the emotional situation happening. Right? You can see you've got a drop-off of customer usage, but you don't know why necessarily. Right? It could be something that's much bigger than just fixing a button. The second thing is launch, learn, repeat. I think most people get that. It's basically just experimentation is our status quo. We're always testing. Third is this. It's always about being a host. In the case of the growth team, being a host really means getting people to understand our product, making people comfortable and ready to use Airbnb, right? We're not hosting. That's what our hosts do. So those of you in the audience who are hosts, and thank you, you're doing the hard work. You're taking care of our guests. But as a growth team, we've got to make sure people feel comfortable. And then finally, this idea of being nimble and sure-footed. This is an interesting one because Facebook says they like to move fast and break stuff. Right? We don't like to break stuff. We think that breaking things kills trust. Right? So we want to move quickly. That if you remember, one of our core values is every frame matters. Right? So we want to get the details right. So we don't have the details right, we wait. Right? We're going to keep working on it until we get the details right. We're not going to roll it out to 100%. So with that in mind, now I'm going to talk about my team. The online marketing team at Airbnb, inside the growth team, we manage paid search, we manage display, programmatic, paid social, SEO, and all the engagement marketing. So email, push, SMS, right? And so the way we think about it is this. We like to think that, well, that's not my slide, that doing what's right for the user is good for the business, right? It comes back to that love idea. And I personally think that if you're doing a great job with your advertising and your marketing, it should be part of the user experience. It should feel natural. It shouldn't feel like you're being hassled all the time. It should just feel like a natural flow. That's going to be the ultimate state. And the cliche we use in the industry would be this, right? Right message, right person, right time, right? But so what? It's a cliche. How do you get there? That's a hard thing to do. And a lot of people in the industry will try to sell you and say, hey, you just plug some technology in. We've got all these services. If you do this, it'll all work out, right? It's a lot deeper than that. So I personally have broken this down into 6 things, and I really obsess on this with my team. We think about these things here, and I'm going to go into all of them, and then automating them. So let's get into that. The first thing is context. So when you think about context, you've got implicit and explicit context, right? Explicit context would be someone clicks on an ad, someone comes to your website, they perform an action. You can see what they're doing, right? You can see if they like it or they don't like it. That's easy. But you have implicit context too. So I shared with you that I'm Canadian, right? And half the year in Canada, it's really cold. That's why I live in San Francisco. And when it's cold, it'd be a great time to give me a message about a great destination that's warm, right? I could come to Tel Aviv. It'd be nice. I could go to the beach, right? So I gave that to you. You can see my IP address. You can see my mobile device. You know where I am. So use both of them. Think about the full context. The next is the idea of relevance. I think you all get it, but it's amazing how often I see this getting wrong, I can go do a Google search for like black Nike sneakers, and I see all these other things that are just like shoe-related, right? It should be obvious what I'm looking for. I was very explicit. So when your users are giving you really explicit information, make sure you're giving them what they want. Don't over-focus on pushing what you want. So this one here really translates down to authenticity, which is a bit of a buzzword, right? But let's think about this realistically. In today's world, information travels really, really fast, right? I can make a story up, I can convince you, I can get some good sales happening, but if you don't have a good experience, if it doesn't match up, right? If what I'm promising doesn't match up to your reality, you're going to tell your friends about it. I'm going to have negative word of mouth, right? So you've got to be thinking through what you're doing, and we believe you've got to be thinking for the long run. So this here is a little bit of my own pun. It's kind of a matrix joke. This Roush pill comes back to that idea of Roush Street, where our first apartment was at, our first listing, our first office. We bring a lot of things into our culture on purpose. So this word Roush is also that pink color. We have a whole design palette, like a palette of colors, that reference different points in our history. And Roush is this brand color you see all the time for Airbnb now, their rebrand. So it's like the red pill. So 3 things to think about, right? The first is that people don't limit themselves to one device. As marketers, it's easy from an attribution point of view just to say like, hey, I'll look at mobile, I'll look at desktop, whatever it is, look at TV, look at radio, keep them separate. People use all sorts of devices. It should be obvious, but people don't do it, right? The second thing is this idea of channels. Marketers love channels. It's a bad thing, right? It's self-inflicted. We create our teams in silos where people are competing against each other in channels, but our users don't think that. I've never met a user who says, I only click on search ads, I ignore display, or I only like radio, I hate TV, right? People do all of these things, and you've got to be aware of that. The other thing that I think is a real bad situation in the world today for marketing is this idea of mobile as a channel, right? Mobile's not a channel, mobile's a device. It has lots of channels on it. You've got to keep it separate. Not only that, but the tipping point's already happened on the internet. There's more mobile users than desktop users. So you've got to be thinking about that. And finally, this idea of people voting with their actions, it's that explicit context thing I mentioned. But what happens a lot in companies is the most senior person or the highest paid person makes the decisions that are actually not what users want, right? They fall back on their opinion. It's not a good gut feeling, it's just what they like. And that's wrong. So when you're in a growth team, when you're doing something like what we do, and probably many of you do, you've got a cross-functional team. So on the team I'm on, I report to the VP of engineering. We've got product managers, we've got engineers, we have data scientists, we have finance people, we have marketers, right? Working together. And if we're not all thinking about how to unify that vision and we're not all working in the same direction, you get bad outcomes, right? As your company gets bigger, you've got to really think about that. Inside of Airbnb on the growth team, we work in functional pods with engineers, data scientists, marketers, everyone all sitting together at the same desks in an area. So if they're working on a project together, they sit together, right? We move people around based on the projects they're working on. Like, we don't want the engineers on this floor, and the marketers on this floor, and the data scientists over here. It creates a lot of silos and a lot of bad communication. And then finally, I'd recommend you guys check out our nerds.airbnb.com blog. We put up a lot of information about our testing, our data, right? Like I said, empathy-driven, evidence-fueled. We do think a lot about data. So with that in mind, now let me give you the practical example. At this point, you're like, Paul, you've talked a lot about some really high-level things. You shared some, cool insights into Airbnb. You made a couple of jokes. That's fun. But like, prove it. Like, what you guys actually do, right? And I know that Israelis are pretty pragmatic. So let's get to the pudding. So in our latest campaign, what we looked at was this idea of mass tourism. And for those of you who've been in San Francisco, probably you've all been to Fisherman's Wharf. It's the #1 tourist destination listed in most guides. If you live in San Francisco like I do, you've gone once in your life and you never go back again. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. It's just not the really cool, fun area of the city. There's no really good restaurants there. It gets actually cold there, right? It's not the fun part. And if you live in the cities, you don't tend to like these big buses rolling around either, right? It's a very generic, commodity-driven consumer experience, and that's not what we're about as a company. So go a bit further. We did a survey. We talked to all of our users, and we asked them, why the heck do you use Airbnb? Like, we're glad you do. We love the growth rate, but why do you come back? The #1 reason they said was to live like a local. So even though we push that out as our messaging, that's what people said. 86% of users said they want to use Airbnb to live like a local. So using that insight to kick off our campaign and this idea of mass tourism is our provocation, right? We wanted to look at traveling versus living. So there's this interesting tension there, right? Like, we all get that concept of live like a local. But if I'd ask you how many places you've traveled to, you'd say all these places, right? You might be like me, like over 40. If I asked you how many places you've lived, it might only be a couple, right? Like, I've lived in 4. But the reality is that when you live somewhere, you feel like you belong somewhere, right? You stay somewhere long enough, you have roots, you meet people, you feel comfortable there. And so how can we create that, right? So our campaign is this idea of not going somewhere, but living somewhere. And we looked at how to do that, not just from a marketing point of view, but right through to the product. So we'll walk through that. And first, I'll kick you off with the video spot.
Don't go to Paris. Don't tour Paris. And please don't do Paris. Live in Paris. When you Airbnb in Paris, you have your own home. Make your bed. Cook. The stuff you normally do. Don't go to LA. Don't go to New York. Don't go to Tokyo. Live there. Live in Malibu. Live in the East Village. Live in Shinagawa. Feel at home. Anywhere. Do your regular routine. Wherever you go, don't go there. Live there. Even if it's just for a night.
Cool. So we did that, but we wanted to make sure that people understood what the product was. So we've got a lot of things around it, kind of more traditional branding and marketing that you've probably seen. So this one here is really calling out what the product looks like when you get there. By the way, all the hosts and a lot of the guests, a lot of the people you've seen this are actually people in the Airbnb community, so guests and hosts. We love to feature the people who use our product or people who are active in our product. You can see the out-of-home version. You can see things like this. I talked about how important mobile is. So we wanted to make sure our mobile advertising was not disruptive, or not too disruptive, but it was actually natural to your experience. You know, when you're using a mobile device, you're scrolling up and down, right? You're not getting things popping up and stuff like that, which are really annoying. So this was an important one on YouTube, the masthead. So we previously run campaigns on YouTube with the masthead, and some of our campaigns in terms of video and brand awareness were almost entirely on YouTube. And what we found was the masthead actually moved our metrics, but it was a little too expensive. So what we wanted to do here was actually add more functionality to it. So as you can see, you can actually start searching for a destination and come right to the site, and it populates on the site and gets you going. You can see things like this banner here. This actually brings a lot of the design that's inside the product, especially the mobile app. So you can start to get a feeling for what it's like to use the app. And in terms of some of the social media, you can see we were one of the first people to use Facebook Canvas, and so we wanted to give an example of what it was like for families, actual people who were staying there, hosts, right? Pinterest, we were one of the first people. I think we were the first customer to do this with Pinterest, as you can see. All right. Instagram. And so that's all great. You get an idea of the branding, the creative, and how we think about bringing that user experience in. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the thinking behind it, the media plan, and then I'm going to share the product connection to it, so you can see how we brought everything together. So the first thing is, in terms of like digital versus TV, etc., we do spend a lot of money on TV, but we only do it in specific markets and campaigns. There's a lot of times that we shift it entirely digital, right? And when we do that, the lion's share is on YouTube, and then a little bit on other sites. We found that that performs best for the metrics that we're trying to drive, right? For some countries where the budgets are smaller, it's entirely digital. The other thing to think about as you look at the creatives that I showed you is this, right? And you should have seen a lot of families. You should have seen a wide age range of people, right? And you should have seen a diverse group of people, right? We want to represent our community that way, but also what I said earlier was we're really strong in tech workers and creative workers, right? Our core audience is really young. And as we grow bigger, we realize that we've got to call out some of our strategic advantages. We know that if you are bringing your pet with you, if you have a family, that Airbnb offers something much better than other accommodation providers. So we want to make sure that's clear. We want to start making people feel comfortable. So we think about that in our media connections. That's what we call it. In terms of how does the message we're trying to deliver come all the way through in our targeting, the kind of media we select, and the kind of images we're showing. In terms of things like tracking, metrics, KPIs, I won't go too deep into that, but we take mobile super seriously. Like I said to you before, mobile, there's more mobile traffic now than desktop traffic, right? Now, there's something that I'm sure a lot of people here have faced, which is that conversion rates on mobile are lower. And I'd say some of that's a self-serving prophecy, right? Like it converts lower, so you spend less time optimizing it, and you focus on desktop. And we've done that in the past. In terms of our media planning for this campaign, we put a big push on mobile. So that's why I showed you some of the mobile creative. We're really thinking through how can we make a more authentic mobile experience and not just try to push our other work into mobile and hope it works out, right? We built a custom attribution, a cross-device attribution system we call User Profiler that brings together the desktop and the mobile users and starts to fingerprint them and starts to bring them through, and when they sign in, connects it all together. So we have a much better view of how these things work full funnel. So I can answer more questions after, but I just want to give you that feeling like this stuff is not all just brand creative. There's a lot of hardcore thinking that goes underneath to make it great. So when we think about this united experience between product and marketing, as I said, this is a really important thing here. I'm not going to read off the numbers, but the tipping points happen. In terms of Airbnb, over 50% of our users come in, so visitors come in on mobile. Over 50% of signups happen on mobile. So the question is, why are bookings not over 50%? And that's the job we have to solve. So when you look at those creative campaigns, and you come to our new app, when we launched this in April, you can see the same kind of images and the same languages used in the app now, right? We want to make sure that what we're saying to the world matches to the rest of the experience. Even the sign-up page and the other pages. There's also 3 things that we wanted to do, and these all launched in April. A lot of it you probably wouldn't notice if you use Airbnb because we want it that way. Some of it hopefully you've noticed, especially as we roll it out to the whole world. So the first is this idea of matching. Right? So if Brian, our CEO co-founder, wanted to look for the Airbnb logo, Google's a great place, right? Google's mission is to organize the world's information. We get it. He finds all these logos, finds our logo that he wants, and he's happy. Our challenge is a bit different at Airbnb, right? We're not trying to organize the world's information. We're trying to create a world where people can feel like they belong anywhere. And so that means a lot of things to different people. But to get it right, we've got to bring the right kind of guests to the right kind of hosts so they both have a great experience. So we've added a lot of algorithms and a whole matching technology. And so when you're using Airbnb, we're doing a lot of things in the back end to give you different experiences, right? So that the right two people connect together. So as an example, these three people here, they'll all have a different experience when they start scrolling through and searching. They're all looking in Paris, but they're getting completely different results. Right? So next is this idea of neighborhoods. This is really important. You can go to the same city many times and stay in different neighborhoods, and it's different each time. You probably all get that fundamentally. If you think about Tel Aviv, there's completely different neighborhoods. In Paris, completely different experiences depending on where you're staying. One of the advantages of Airbnb is often we're in areas where there are no other choices for accommodation, right? And so you can stay in neighborhoods you wouldn't normally get to. And so how do we make that surface? How can we match?
In our updated app, we highlight 691 neighborhoods in 25 cities. To bring the neighborhoods to life, we photographed all of it from scratch, with real people. 110 photographers captured 83,000 images, and we curated them down to the 2,000 photos you'll see when you visit the updated app. When we were done, we took a step back and realized how much life we captured. Mothers and sons, friends and coworkers, families and strangers. All those moments that bring a place to life. We hope these photos inspire you when you open the app to go and live in these places.
So once again, we didn't want to just promise that to you in a TV ad or a digital video or in a mobile ad. We wanted to make sure that when you're actually on our product, you get a feeling for what you're getting, right? So we can bring you into the experience. And the final piece would be this, guidebooks. So one of the great advantages we have with our community-driven platform is user-generated content, right? We have a really passionate group of people, and they're willing to share things. And so guidebooks is allowing our hosts to share their favorite places and put their own reviews in. So if you look at, let's move forward. Here we go. TripAdvisor, which is sort of the leading site for this, right? It's tourists telling other tourists where to go. There's some value there, but we actually think the real value is hearing from locals, right? If you think about the things that you love the most in Tel Aviv, I bet it's different from the things that TripAdvisor recommends, right? So if you look at the difference here, for those of you who's been to Paris? Yeah? So you've probably been to all these places, or most of the ones on the left. But how many of the places on the right have you been to? I've been to all the places on here, and I can promise you that the places here are really cool. So when you go next, you should take a look at our guidebooks, right? And the other thing I'm not going to show you today, but if you go on our mobile app as an example, when you look at the listing you're staying at, if your host has a guidebook, you can look at the map, and you can see all the places around and the recommendations. Some of our hosts even give you the name of the barista that they love, or something about the restaurant, their favorite thing on the menu. Right? This is a much more personal and local experience. This is how you live like a local, right? This is how you have a whole different experience than other choices you may have. So what does that mean? I know you guys are hardcore, a lot of performance marketers here. You're like, that's nice, Paul, great story, it makes sense, it's kind of fun, it connects together, but does it make a difference for your company? And I can promise you it does. So let's share a couple of data points. So this is data from Google. This is showing brand keyword queries. So for vacation rental, this is things like HomeAway, this is FlipKey, this is VRBO, Airbnb, all the different people who play in the vacation rental category, all of our brand names. And you can see in a lot of markets, we have almost 100% share now, right? So all those competitors, no one's searching for them. They have to fight on the generic keywords. People aren't thinking about their brand. And now you could say, hey, Paul, that's really cool. But vacation rental is a pretty small category. There's all these hotels, OTAs, like Booking.com, Priceline, Expedia. Does it matter? So take a look. So you can see over time, as we've had our brand relaunches, we push on our brand campaigns, as we do brand work, how this has grown, right? In some markets, we have 30% share of brand clicks now. So we're getting more brand queries than competitors who've been around for 100 years, right? In some markets, we're the dominant player now. In Paris, we have more listings available than any single supplier, right? So what I would say to you is brand can make a huge difference if you do it well, right? And that brand loyalty and building that love continues to grow. Those people continue to talk about you. So as you're thinking about building your word of mouth, your virality, be thinking about, how are you generating that user trust, that user experience. Okay, that's what I've got. Thank you.